You don't get to destroy what she built. She said it quietly. No screaming, no tears. Just Emma Walker standing in the wreckage of everything she'd spent 5 years creating, holding a shattered picture frame with her mother's face behind broken glass while three men laughed at her like she was nothing, like she had always been nothing. They thought they knew exactly who they were dealing with. A small town girl, a coffee shop, an easy target. They were wrong about every single thing. If this kind of story moves you, real people standing up when everything is on the line, subscribe to our channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it started, Emma Walker was doing what she did every single day before the sun came up. She was already inside Golden Pine Cafe, moving through the dark kitchen with the ease of someone who had memorized every inch of the place by heart. The espresso machine had been running for 20 minutes. The first pot of drip coffee was halfway through. She had 6 muffins in the oven, a cinnamon roll tray going in right after, and a mental list of the regulars who would start showing up in about 45 minutes. Frank, the mail carrier, who took his coffee. Black and always asked about her weekend. June, the elementary school librarian, who ordered the same lavender latte every Tuesday and Thursday. Old Mr. Peterson, who shuffled in at 7 sharp, sat at the corner table, and never said much, but always left a $5 tip folded into a little triangle on the saucer. Emma knew all of them, not just their orders. She knew Frank's daughter had just started junior high and that he was worried about her. She knew June had been dealing with a landlord dispute for 3 months and tried not to bring it up because she didn't want to burden anyone. She knew Mr. Peterson had lost his wife 2 winters ago and that some days the cafe was the only place he left his house to go. That was what Golden Pine meant to her, not just a business, a place where people exhaled. She had built it from nothing. That was not a figure of speech. 5 years ago, this corner of Mill Haven, Oregon, had been an empty shell of a building, cracked windows, a collapsed ceiling, and the backroom floors, so warped you could feel them flex underfoot. Emma had put her entire savings into the lease-learned drywall repair. From YouTube tutorials, painted every wall herself, sanded the floors on her hands and knees over 3 straight weekends. She had called in every favor she had from friends who knew plumbing and electrical work. She had driven 4 hours each way, twice to a restaurant equipment auction in Portland, because it was the only way she could afford a commercial espresso machine that didn't sound like it was dying every time it ran a shot. Nobody helped her buy this place. Nobody handed it to her. Every dollar, every hour, every decision was hers. And she needed that to be true. She needed it more than most people would ever understand, though she never talked about why. Emma was 26 years old, and she looked exactly like what people assumed she was: a young woman from a small Oregon town who worked hard, smiled easily, and didn't have a complicated past. She was blonde, a little freckled, across the nose from years of early mornings and open windows, the kind of person who made everyone feel remembered because she actually did remember them. She wasn't performing warmth, she just had it. What she didn't talk about was where she came from. What she never mentioned, not to the regulars, not to the part-time help she'd hired last spring, not to anyone in Mill Haven, was her last name. Not the Walker part. That was her mother's name. That was the name she had chosen when she left. The name she didn't use was the one that meant something in circles, that had nothing to do with lavender lattes and cinnamon rolls and $5 tips folded into triangles. Her father was Daniel Walker, the man most people who knew him called Stone. And Stone Walker was not a complicated man in the way that people who had never met him might imagine. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He was, in his way, one of the most principled people Emma had ever known. He believed in loyalty the way other men believed in religion. He believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He believed that the world was full of predators and that someone had to stand between the predators and everyone else. He also believed that the way you did that was sometimes loud, sometimes visible, and not always something a 26-year-old woman building a coffee shop in a mountain town wanted her neighbors thinking about. Stone Walker was a senior here in one of the most recognized motorcycle brotherhoods in the Pacific Northwest. Emma had not spoken to him in 8 years. She didn't think about that on the morning the 3 men walked through her door. She was thinking about the muffin timer, which had 2 minutes left, and whether she had enough oat milk to get through a full Tuesday, which was always heavier than Monday. She was wiping down the espresso machine when she heard the door open and felt the particular quality of silence that followed, the kind that didn't feel like customers. She turned around. Three men, all in their 30s or early 40s. One of them was big in the way that suggested he'd spent time doing something physical, and probably not at a gym. The other two were leaner, harder looking, with the kind of stillness that wasn't relaxed. They stood just inside the door and didn't say anything for a moment. Emma didn't reach for her phone. She didn't step back. She had been raised in a world where you didn't let people know what you were calculating. So she kept her expression the same, polite, attentive, the face she put on for everyone who walked through that door. "We're not open for another 30 minutes, she said, "but if you need coffee, I can get you something." The big one, she would learn later, his name was Garrett, looked around the cafe slowly, the way someone looks at a room when they're pricing it. Not for what they want to buy, for what they want to own. "We're not here for coffee," he said. "Okay," she kept her voice even. "What can I do for you?" Garrett reached into his jacket and set a piece of paper on the counter. Emma didn't look at it immediately. She looked at him. "Mr. Voss has an arrangement with businesses in this area," Garrett said. "It's a protection service. Standard rate for a place this size is $800 a month. You pay the first of each month. Everything stays smooth. You don't things get complicated." Emma looked at the paper then. It was a single page, a number at the top, a payment schedule below it, and a line for a signature at the bottom. It looked almost legitimate, which she recognized as the point. She set the paper back on the counter without signing anything or touching it further. "I don't know who Mr. Voss is," she said, "and I don't pay protection fees." Garrett's expression didn't change. "Every business in this strip pays. The laundromat, the hardware store, the pharmacy. It keeps things running. It's just how it works here." "That might be how it works for them," Emma said. "It's not how it works here." She paused. "I think you should leave." The second man, shorter, with a scar that ran along his jaw in a thin white line, smiled for the first time. It was not a friendly smile. "You don't want to make this harder than it has to be," he said. "I'm not making it anything," Emma said. "You came into my business before I'm open and tried to sell me something I didn't ask for. I'd like you to leave now." Garrett picked the paper up off the counter and slipped it back into his jacket. He looked at her for a long moment, the way people look when they're deciding whether something is worth their time. "We'll come back," he said. "Think about it." They left. Emma stood at the counter for 30 seconds without moving. Then she turned around, checked the muffin timer, 1 minute left, and let out a slow breath through her nose. She told herself it was nothing, that it would go away, that men like that made rounds and moved on when people weren't worth the effort. She had grown up understanding exactly what men like that were. She had also grown up understanding that showing fear to them was the same as handing them exactly what they wanted. She took the muffins out. She unlocked the front door. Frank came in at 6:48 and asked about her weekend, and she smiled and answered him, and the morning moved forward the way it always did. She didn't call the police, not yet. She needed to know if this was a first move or a last warning. She found out 3 days later. During those 3 days, she did some quiet asking around. Not loudly, not in a way that would raise alarm. She talked to Martin, who ran the hardware store 2 blocks over, casual conversation about how business was going. Had he had any trouble lately? Martin went very still and then said everything was fine, a little too quickly. She stopped by the pharmacy and talked to Donna behind the counter, who she'd known for 3 years. Donna changed the subject twice before Emma let her. She started to understand the shape of what was around her. Richard Voss was not a newcomer. He'd been operating in Millhaven and 3 surrounding towns for at least 4 years, working through a network of men who visited small businesses and collected weekly or monthly fees that had no legal basis and no legitimate service behind them. The protection he offered was protection from himself. Pay him, he left you alone. Don't pay him, and things started happening. Equipment broke. Suppliers got calls suggesting there were problems with your account. Health inspectors showed up with paperwork that somehow always found small violations. And if none of that moved you, someone came and made it physical. He had never been charged. The police had opened investigations twice and gotten nowhere because the witnesses, every single business owner who'd been paying him for years, refused to come forward. They were afraid, not of Voss personally, but of what came after testimony, after court dates, after the case maybe going nowhere, and Voss or his men still knowing your name and your address and where your kids went to school. Emma understood that fear. She didn't think less of anyone for having it. She just didn't share it. The morning the three men came back, she was helping a table of four order breakfast. Two of them were tourists passing through, and she was explaining the difference between the two single-origin beans she was using when the door opened, and Garrett walked in this time with four men behind him. She recognized the scar-faced one. The other three were new. She finished what she was saying to the table, walked back to the counter. "We told you we'd come back," Garrett said. "I know." She kept her voice quiet enough that the tourist table couldn't hear her clearly. "And I told you my answer. I'm not paying you anything." Garrett looked at the room, at the tables, at the equipment, at the wall where she had hung framed photographs. Her mother, the cafe's first week, opened the town's winter festival 2 years ago, where she'd set up a booth and serve free hot chocolate for 3 hours. "That's a nice place," he said, nodding at the photographs. "Nice machines. Everything looks pretty expensive." "Get out of my cafe," Emma said. Garrett turned and looked at the man to his left. Just looked at him. What happened next took maybe 4 minutes. They were systematic about it in a way that was somehow worse than chaos would have been. Two of them went to the espresso machine, the one she had driven 8 hours round trip to buy, and they took it off the counter and dropped it on the floor. The sound it made when it hit was something Emma would hear in her sleep for weeks afterward. Another man went to the nearest table and turned it over. The customers, the tourist Frank, who had come back in for a second coffee, June, who was on her lunch break, scrambled back against the walls. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor. Emma didn't move from behind the counter. The scar-faced man came around the side and opened the cabinet where she kept the recipe binder. Her mother's handwriting on the tabs. Her mother's notes in the margins, modifications and improvements from 20 years of baking. He looked at her while he picked it up. "Don't," she said. Her voice was flat and very quiet. He dropped it on the floor and stepped on it. Emma was silent. Two of them went to the wall where the photographs hung. They took this down. They didn't smash them against the wall. That would have been almost operatic, and these men were not dramatic. They just set them on the floor and stepped on the glass, one by one, methodically. The framed photo of her mother was in the center of the arrangement, the one Emma had hung first, the one she'd looked at every single morning for 5 years while she made coffee before sunrise. It had been her mother's favorite photograph of herself. She was laughing at something off-screen, mid-laugh, completely unguarded in a way Emma had rarely seen in real life, because her mother had been a woman who kept a lot inside. The big man put his boot through the glass. Emma moved from behind the counter then. Not rushing, she walked to where the frame had been kicked aside, knelt down, picked it up. The glass had shattered in a spiderweb pattern across her mother's face. She touched the frame carefully and turned it over and began picking glass away from the photograph piece by piece. "You don't get to destroy what she built," she said. She wasn't talking about the cafe. None of them responded. Garrett looked at her from across the room with an expression that was almost confused. He had expected tears by now, or bargaining or anger, and he didn't know what to do with what he was actually looking at. "We'll be back at the end of the week," he said. "Have the first payment ready." They left. The cafe was destroyed, 2 tables overturned, the espresso machine in pieces on the floor, the recipe binder open and bent spined on the tiles, glass everywhere. Frank was the first to move. He crossed the room and crouched beside Emma, and she realized she was still kneeling on the floor holding her mother's photograph. "Emma," he said carefully, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. She stood up. She wasn't shaking. June had her phone in her hand. "I'm calling the police right now." "Thank you," Emma said. She looked around the cafe. She did an inventory in her head, the way she'd been taught to think, not in terms of how bad it was, but in terms of what was actually true. The espresso machine was gone. The one table had a cracked leg that might be repairable. The recipe binder was damaged but salvageable. The photographs were broken, but the photographs themselves were intact. The cafe was not burned. The structure was standing. The people in it were unhurt. This was not the end. This was a first move, designed to frighten her into compliance. She knew the playbook because she had grown up watching people who ran a completely different kind of operation, and the psychology underneath it was the same. Establish dominance early. Make your target feel isolated. Make them believe resistance is impossible. Make them believe they're alone. That last one was the part that required the most thought. Because here was the truth. Emma was sitting inside there in her damaged cafe while June talked to the dispatcher, and Frank kept asking if anyone was hurt. She was not alone in the way Garrett and his men assumed she was alone. She had never been alone in that way, but accessing the thing that meant she wasn't alone required a phone call she had been avoiding for 8 years. The police arrived in about 20 minutes. The officer who came, a woman named Reyes, who Emma knew slightly from the time she'd come in for coffee, took a full report and photographed the damage. She was professional and thorough and honest. "I'm going to be straight with you," Officer Reyes said, standing in the middle of the cafe. "We know who Voss is. We've had reports before. The problem we keep running into is that people won't testify. Without witnesses who'll stand up, we can't move a case forward." "I'll testify," Emma said. Reyes looked at her steadily. "That's good, but one person, even a very credible person, is often not enough for the kind of charges that would actually put him away. We need a pattern. We need multiple victims willing to come forward." Emma nodded slowly. "How many people do you think are paying him in this area?" Reyes glanced at her notebook. "Best estimate, 32 businesses in 4 towns. 32 businesses. 32 people who had been living inside exactly the fear that these men had been counting on." Emma thought about Martin at the hardware store, going very still when she asked him casual questions. She thought about Donna at the pharmacy, changing the subject twice. She thought about every business owner in every town who had decided the math of fear was safer than the math of risk. She understood that math. She genuinely did. She had a mother to protect, once not a business, but something more important. And she had made the calculation of quiet safety many times. But she had also learned slowly at cost, through the very specific education of watching her father and the people around him, that there was another kind of calculation. One that looked different when you weren't doing it alone. That night, after the cafe was as cleaned up as she could manage, after she had put her mother's photograph in a careful, temporary frame, after she had called her supplier about emergency equipment rental so she could open in the morning, after she had done every practical thing she could do, with her hands, she sat at the center table and she was quiet for a long time. She thought about the 32 businesses. She thought about Officer Reyes and her notebook. She thought about Garrett's face when she hadn't cried. And then she thought about something her father had told her when she was 12 years old, sitting on the back step of a house she barely remembered now. He told her the only thing that makes a predator feel safe is the belief that nobody will stand together against him. The moment that changes everything, changes. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to a contact she had not called in 8 years. She held the phone in her hand for a long time. Then she pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Emma." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Not surprised, not wounded, not accusatory, just present. "Dad," she said. And then she stopped because she wasn't sure where to begin, and her throat had tightened in a way she hadn't expected. "Are you hurt?" he said. Just that, immediately without preamble. "No," she said. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." A pause. "Then tell me what happened." She told him. All of it. The 3 men, the first morning, the 4 minutes of systematic destruction, the recipe binder, the photograph, the 32 businesses. Officer Reyes and her notebook, the 8 years of a case going nowhere because nobody would stand up. She told him in order, without crying, with the clarity she'd learned from watching him handle problems. His whole life, you say what is true, you say it exactly, you don't add to it, and you don't take away from it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" he said. She had thought about this part too. She knew what she was asking and what it meant and what it would look like to her town and what it would cost her in terms of the very thing she'd spent 5 years trying to build a version of herself that was entirely her own, entirely separate from his world. But she also knew what it meant to 32 business owners who were all alone inside a fear that someone with the right kind of presence might be able to break open. "I need people to stop being afraid," she said. "That's all. I need something to change the math." Daniel Walker was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I'll be there tomorrow." Emma set the phone down on the table in her broken cafe. She sat very still. She had made the call. She couldn't take it back, and she didn't want to. But she was also aware, with the specific clarity that comes after a decision rather than before it, that tomorrow was going to change something fundamental about the 5 years she had built here. Not destroy them, but change them. She looked at her mother's photograph in its temporary frame. Her mother had known both sides of this, had loved her father and also understood why Emma needed to leave. why she needed to prove something in her own way. Had never asked her to go back, but had also never told her that going back when it mattered, when it was right, was weakness. Building your own life doesn't mean you have to stand alone. Emma had not been ready to understand that when her mother said it. She thought she might be ready now. She picked up the photograph, carried it to the shelf behind the counter, where she could see it from the register, and leaned it carefully against the wall. Then she went to check what supplies she needed for the morning. Because tomorrow, whatever it brought, she was still opening the cafe. She opened the cafe the next morning. That was the first thing people needed to understand about Emma Walker. She opened the cafe. The espresso machine was gone, replaced by a borrowed single group unit that a supplier had driven up from Eugene at 7 in the morning because Emma had called him at 11 the night before and explained the situation in plain terms, and he had said without hesitating that he'd be there. She had one working coffee grinder instead of two. She had no pastry display because the case had a cracked panel she hadn't had time to address. She had a hand-lettered sign on the door that said, "We're open. Him in." Frank arrived at 6:48 like he always did. He looked at the borrowed equipment, at the hand-lettered sign, at Emma behind the counter in her apron, moving like nothing fundamental had shifted in the world, and he said, "Emma." "Morning, Frank," she said. "Black coffee." He sat down at his usual stool and didn't say anything for a moment. "Then you're really opening today?" "I'm always open Tuesday." He watched her work. After a minute, he said quietly, "Those men are going to come back." "I know. And you're still here." "I'm still here," she said. She set his coffee in front of him. "Frank, have they ever come to you?" The stillness that moved across his face was its own answer. He picked up his cup and looked at it instead of at her. "You don't have to tell me the details," she said. "I'm just asking if you know what I'm talking about." But he set the cup down. "Emma, I've got a daughter in 7th grade." "I know. And I've got a route that puts me in 4 towns 5 days a week." "I know that too." He looked up at her then. "I'm not proud of it." "I didn't ask you to be," she said. "I'm not judging you. I just needed to know if it was real." He nodded once. "It's real." By 8 that morning, she had confirmed what she already suspected. June came in for her lavender latte and within 4 minutes of sitting down, was talking in a low voice about the pharmacy on Callister Street and what Donna had told her in confidence last spring. Old Mr. Peterson came in at 7 sharp, like always. And when Emma asked him gently how things were at his woodworking shop 3 blocks over, the old man's hands tightened around his coffee cup, and he said, "I've been paying that man for 3 years, Emma. I'm 81 years old, and I've been paying him because I didn't know what else to do." She reached across the counter and put her hand over his. "You're not going to have to anymore," she said. He looked at her with the careful skepticism of a man who had lived long enough to know that sentences like that were easier to say than to make true. "You don't know that," he said. "Not yet," she admitted, "but I will soon." The morning moved through her in pieces, customers arriving, orders, going out, the borrowed machine running slower than she was used to, a line forming at 8:30 that she worked through alone because her part-time help had called in shaken and apologetic saying she'd heard what happened and was afraid to come in. Emma had told her it was fine, that she understood, that she'd see her when she was ready. She understood. She genuinely did. But understanding fear didn't mean surrendering to it. At 9:45, between the breakfast rush and the mid-morning lull, Emma sat at the counter with a legal pad and wrote down everything she knew. Not a list of grievances, a map. She wrote down the names of every business owner she had reason to believe was paying Voss. She wrote what she'd been told directly and what she'd inferred from conversations and silences. She noted which ones had families, which ones had been operating for decades, which ones had the most to lose, and which ones she thought, based on years of small-town relationship building, might have the most willingness to act if someone else moved first. She was still writing when the door opened and Officer Reyes walked in out of uniform in jeans and a gray jacket. Emma looked up. "I'm off duty," Reyes said. She sat at the counter 2 stools from where Frank had been. "I heard you opened." "I opened." Reyes looked at the borrowed equipment. "How bad is the damage?" "The machine is a total loss. Everything else is repairable." Emma set her pen down. "Have you made any progress since yesterday?" Reyes was quiet for the moment in a way that told Emma the answer before she said it. "We filed the report. It's in the system. But without other witnesses coming forward, it goes the same place the other reports went." "Yes." Emma slid the legal pad across the counter. Reyes looked at it, her expression shifted, something careful and focused moving across her face as she read through the list. Emma, she said slowly, where did you get these names? Conversations, Emma said. 3 years of making coffee for this town. You can't use this as legal evidence. I know, but you can use it as a starting point. You can knock on those doors, not as an investigator following up on a complaint, just as someone checking in. If even 4 or 5 of them are willing to talk to you, you have a pattern. And if you have a pattern, it changes the case. Reyes was still looking at the list, significantly. I think you know most of these names already, Emma said. Reyes didn't confirm that, but she also didn't deny it. There's something else, Reyes said. She looked up. I got a call this morning from my sergeant. Someone from Voss's operation reached out to the department informally through a contact suggesting that the incident at your cafe yesterday was a misunderstanding. That you had an existing business relationship with Mr. Voss, and there was a payment dispute that got out of hand. Emma stared at her. They're trying to frame it as a civil matter, Reyes said, a contract dispute. There is no contract, Emma said. I never signed anything. There was no agreement. I know that, but Voss has people. Some of them wear suits and went to law school. Reyes met her eyes. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you're up against. This is not just the 3 men who walked in here. This is an operation with infrastructure. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, how many people do you think Voss has paid off inside the department? Reyes didn't answer immediately. That pause was its own answer too. I don't think it's widespread, Reyes said carefully. But I think there are people who have looked the other way for reasons that aren't entirely professional. Which means even if business owners come forward, the case could still go sideways. It's a risk. Emma looked at the list on the legal pad. She thought about Mr. Peterson and his 81 years in his woodworking shop, and 3 years of payments he couldn't afford to someone who had never done a single legitimate thing to earn them. She thought about Frank and his daughter in 7th grade. She thought about Donna at the pharmacy changing the subject twice. She thought about her father's voice on the phone last night. Calm and present and immediate. Are you hurt? Are you safe? Tell me what happened. Someone is coming today, Emma said. Someone who changes the math. Reyes looked at her carefully. What does that mean? It means that the reason none of these people have come forward is that they believe they're alone. They believe there's nothing and nobody big enough to make the risk feel worth it. Emma picked up her pen. That's going to change today. Emma, Reyes's voice had shifted into something more cautious. What are you doing? Fixing the part of this that laws can't fix on their own, Emma said. Reyes studied her face for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Emma. Be careful that what comes to help you doesn't create a different problem. The person coming here doesn't want to create problems, Emma said. He wants to solve them. After Reyes left the cafe, stayed quiet for about an hour. Emma used it to repair the display case panel with a strip of clear epoxy she found in the supply closet. Remake the signage on the chalkboard menu that had been knocked crooked during the destruction, and reorganize the counter display that the men had swept clear during their visit. Small things, practical things, the work that needed doing regardless of everything else. At 11:15, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. Miss Walker. A man's voice, professionally smooth, the kind of voice that had been trained to sound reasonable, even when saying unreasonable things. My name is Gerald Fitch. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Voss regarding the unfortunate situation yesterday. Emma leaned against the back counter and kept her voice completely neutral. What situation is that? The payment dispute at your establishment. Mr. Voss wanted me to reach out personally to express his regret that things became heated. He believes there may have been a miscommunication about the terms of your agreement, and he'd like to offer you an opportunity to resolve this without further disruption. There is no agreement, Emma said. There never was. A brief pause. Miss Walker, I understand you may feel that way, but our records indicate your records are fabricated, she said pleasantly. And you know that. So let's not do this part of the conversation. Tell me what Mr. Voss actually wants. Another pause, longer this time. When Fitch spoke again, the professional smoothness had thinned slightly. Mr. Voss is a reasonable businessman. He's willing to offer you a reduced rate for the first 3 months as a goodwill gesture. $300 a month instead of $800. That's a significant concession. My answer is the same as it was when your colleagues visited, Emma said. I don't pay protection fees. I won't pay protection fees. If Mr. Voss sends anyone else to my cafe, I will be adding harassment, extortion, and criminal coercion to the police report I filed yesterday. And I want you to tell him something from me. Fitch waited. Tell him to enjoy the next 24 hours, Emma said, because the day after that is going to look very different. She ended the call. Her hands were not shaking. She looked at her mother's photograph on the shelf behind the counter. I know, she said quietly to no one in particular. I know. The afternoon came in slowly. 2 regular lunch customers, a couple who were driving through and stopped for soup. Emma made everything herself, moved efficiently, kept the borrowed machine running, did not think too hard about what was coming, because thinking too hard about it would not help anything, and the work in front of her required her full attention. At 2:15, June came back, not for coffee this time. She sat at the counter and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at Emma with an expression that was a mixture of admiration and something close to fear on Emma's behalf. I talked to Donna, June said. How is she? Scared, but listening. June paused. She asked me, and this is a direct question from her, she asked me what's going to change. Why this time is different from the last 2 times someone tried to push back against Voss and nothing happened. Emma considered that carefully. It was a fair question. It was the exact right question. Because this time someone is coming who makes it genuinely safe to stand up, Emma said. Not just emotionally safe, actually physically, concretely safe. Someone whose presence tells Voss that the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of stopping. June looked at her steadily. Who? Emma looked at her for a long moment. She had not told anyone in Millhaven about her father, about who she was, about where she came from. She had spent 5 years very deliberately being only Emma Walker, the woman who built the cafe. My father, she said. June waited. My father is... Emma paused, chose her words the way you choose a path through uncertain ground. He's someone people in certain circles know and respect and don't want as an enemy. What circles? Emma met her eyes. The Hell's Angels, she said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight and texture. June blinked once. Then, your father is yes, and he's coming here. He'll be here this evening. June looked at the counter surface. She seemed to be rearranging something in her understanding of the last 3 years. Emma, making her lavender latte twice a week, Emma knowing her name before she said it. Emma donating leftover food to the shelter on Willow Street and placing it alongside this new information and seeing how they fit together in a way that was more coherent than she'd expected. Is he going to hurt anyone? June asked. Not accusatorially, just directly. No, Emma said. He's going to show up. That's different. June was quiet for another moment. Then she nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to tell Donna what I told you, Emma said. And I need you to tell her that if she has any records, any payments, any messages, anything, she's kept because some part of her knew she might need it. Someday she should find them. June looked up. You think people have been keeping records? I think 32 people who have been living in fear for years are not stupid, Emma said. I think at least some of them have kept something, because fear makes you want to disappear, and it also makes you want to have something in your hand in case you get the chance to use it. June left 20 minutes later with a specific look on her face, the look of someone who has just understood that something is actually going to happen and who is deciding whether to be part of it. At 4 in the afternoon, Garrett walked in. Emma had expected this. Not him specifically, not at this exact hour, but she had expected that Voss would send someone before the end of the business day to check whether the phone call from Fitch had worked, to reassess, to apply pressure if it hadn't. He walked in alone this time, no backup. That told her something about how they'd read her, a young woman alone in a damaged cafe, already rattled, probably weakening. He sat at the counter, looked around at the repaired display case, the reorganized counter, the hand-lettered sign. You fixed the place up, he said. I'm good at that, she said. Mr. Voss is a patient man, Garrett said. He told Fitch to offer you a deal. You didn't take it. That's right. That makes things harder for you. Emma looked at him directly. Garrett, she had not used his name before, and the slight shift in his expression told her he noticed. I'm going to tell you something as honestly as I can. I think you're someone who does what you do because it pays, and because you're good at reading fear, and because the people you work for have made the risk feel manageable. And I think somewhere under all of that, you probably know that what you're doing to people in this town is wrong. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. I'm not saying this to appeal to your conscience, Emma continued. I'm saying it because in about 18 hours, something is going to happen that makes the risk calculation change significantly. And I want you to know that before it happens, not as a threat, as information. Garrett looked at her for a long time. You're an interesting person, he said finally. I built this cafe with my own hands, she said. I've been making coffee for this town since I was 21 years old. I know every person who walks through that door. I know their families and their problems and what they take in their coffee, and I am not going to be moved by men who break things and walk away. Garrett stood up. Voss is going to send more people, he said. People I don't control. I know, Emma said, and they're not going to be as patient as I've been. I know that too. He looked at her one more time with that same strange evaluating expression. Then he left. Emma went to the back room and sat down on the step stool she kept next to the supply shelf and took 5 slow breaths. Not because she was falling apart, she wasn't, but because what Garrett had just told her without meaning to was that Voss was preparing to escalate, and escalation before her father arrived could get dangerous. She picked up her phone and called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. Where are you? She said. About 4 hours out, he said. Maybe 3.5. They're going to escalate tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. A brief pause. How many men does Voss have locally? I don't know exactly. At least 5 that I've seen. Garrett, the one who led the group yesterday, he seemed like he was warning me just now. I think he's not entirely comfortable with where this is heading. There's always one like that, Daniel said. Doesn't make him safe, just makes him complicated. What should I do if they come back tonight? Is there somewhere you can be that isn't the cafe? Emma thought about that. She lived in the apartment above the cafe. She'd never thought of that proximity as a vulnerability before. The cafe is everything, she said. If I leave it unattended and they come back, Emma, his voice was steady and careful. The cafe can be repaired. You can't. She pressed her lips together. I'm not leaving it. The silence on his end was not disagreement. It was her father doing what he'd always done, listening to her, completely hearing what she actually meant, and not wasting words telling her she was wrong when she wasn't wrong. All right, he said. Don't open the front door after dark. Keep your phone charged. Call me the minute anything changes. Okay. And Emma, a pause. You called me after 8 years. I know what that cost you. She didn't say anything. I just want you to know, he said quietly, that I've been waiting for you to need me. Not because I wanted you to need me, but because I knew this world doesn't let people stay untouched forever, and I wanted to be the person you called when it came for you. Emma's throat tightened. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. I tried to do this alone, she said. I know you did, and you got further than almost anyone would have. I didn't want to use your name. I know. I still don't. That's not... She stopped. I called you because people here are afraid and I don't know how to fix that alone. I called you for them, not just for me. I know that too, he said. That's why I'm coming. She hung up and sat in the back room for another minute. Then she went back out to the counter. The evening came in the way evenings did in Millhaven, the light changing the foot traffic, thinning the last few customers coming through for something warm before heading home. Emma served all of them. She wiped down tables. She balanced the register. She did every closing task in the exact order she always did them because routine was its own form of courage, the refusal to let disruption rewrite the shape of your day. At 7:45, she locked the front door. At 8:10, she heard voices outside. Not loud, not the sound of a large group. 2 voices close to the door, then movement around the side of the building. Emma didn't go to the window. She moved to the counter, picked up her phone, and called the non-emergency police line. She spoke quietly and gave her address and said she had reason to believe someone was attempting to access the building, and could someone please drive by. The dispatcher said a car would come by within the hour. Within the hour, she looked at the borrowed espresso machine on the counter. She thought about the recipe binder with her mother's handwriting. She pulled up her text and sent a single message to her father, people outside. Not inside yet. Police notified. His response came in 40 seconds. On my way faster. Don't engage. 20 minutes later, the voices outside stopped. She didn't hear them leave. They were just there, and then they weren't. The police cruiser came by at 9:15 and the officer walked the perimeter and found nothing and told Emma everything looked clear and drove away. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat at the center table with a cup of tea she didn't drink and her mother's photograph within eyeline and waited for the morning. At 5:15 before sunrise, she heard it. Distant at first, so distant she thought she was imagining it. A low vibration in the air, more felt than heard, like weather coming. Then it grew steadily and without hurrying, the way something inevitable grows, not rushing, because it doesn't need to rush. It had all the time it needed. It was already in motion. Emma stood up from the table. She walked to the front window and looked out at the empty mountain road that ran through the center of Millhaven. The first headlight appeared at the top of the rise, then another, then a dozen. Then she stopped counting. They came the way her father had always done things, with complete visibility, with no attempt to hide or minimize, with the specific confidence of people who wanted to be seen because being seen was itself the point. The sound of them filled the entire town, not chaotic, not threatening in the way of violence, but enormous, the kind of sound that wakes people up and brings them to their windows and makes them understand that something is happening that they are not going to be able to ignore. Emma pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. She hadn't seen her father in 8 years. She was about to see what she had called down onto this mountain town, and whether it was the right thing, and whether 32 people living in fear were about to have a reason to step out of it. She unlocked the front door of the cafe and stepped outside. The motorcycles were still coming over the rise, steady and endless, seeming in the pre-dawn dark headlights, sweeping the road ahead of them. And at the front of the formation, exactly where she knew he would be, was a single rider who sat in the saddle, the way someone sits when they have spent 40 years being exactly who they are and have made peace with every part of it. Daniel Walker pulled to a stop in front of the Golden Pine Cafe. He looked exactly like her father. He took off his helmet and looked at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because 8 years is a long time and some silences are not empty. They're full of everything that didn't get said and is now trying to find its way out all at once. Then he said, "Show me what they broke." And Emma Walker opened the door of her cafe and let her father in. Daniel Walker stepped through the door of the Golden Pine Cafe and stopped. I didn't say anything. He looked at the borrowed espresso machine, at the cracked display case panel Emma had epoxied back together at the wall where the photographs had been, and where most of them now hung again, slightly crooked in places with new glass in some frames and no glass in others, but back on the wall because Emma had put them back. He looked at her mother's photograph on the shelf behind the counter. He stood there for a long moment with his helmet in his hand. "You fixed it," he said. "I fixed what I could," Emma said. He walked to the counter and set his helmet down and looked at the photograph of Emma's mother for a long time without speaking. His expression was not readable in the easy way that some people's expressions are. He had a face that had learned to hold things internally, had learned it over decades, and what showed on the surface was only what he chose to show. Right now, he was choosing to show nothing, which Emma recognized as the way he looked when something was hitting him harder than he intended to let anyone see. "She would have had something to say about all this," he said. "She would have made you coffee first and then said it," Emma said. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Yeah," he said, "she would have." Emma poured 2 cups from the drip machine. The espresso setup wasn't ready yet, and set one in front of him and held the other. They stood on opposite sides of the counter and drank coffee in the early dark, while outside the sound of motorcycles settling engines, cutting off one by one, filled the morning air of Millhaven in a way that no sound had ever filled it before. "How many did you bring?" she asked. "Enough," he said. "Dad." 112, he said. "Give or take. Word traveled faster than I expected." Some of these men drove through the night from Idaho. Emma absorbed that. 112 men who drove through the night because Daniel Walker's daughter called and needed something to change. "I need you to understand something," she said, "about why I called you." "Tell me." "I didn't call you because I wanted muscle. I didn't call you because I wanted Voss's men frightened into backing off and then nothing changes underneath." Daniel looked at her steadily. "I called you because people here are trapped inside their own fear," she said. 32 businesses. Years of paying a man who should have been stopped at the beginning. And the reason he wasn't stopped is because everyone has been standing alone. The moment they stop standing alone, The moment there's something big enough to make the risk feel survivable, they'll act. I know they will, but I need what you brought to make that moment real. You want us to be the reason people open their doors, he said. Yes, he drank his coffee. That's a smarter play than what I expected you to call me for. What did you expect me to call to you for? He set the cup down. Honestly, I thought you'd want me to go have a conversation with Voss. I don't want that, Emma said immediately. Whatever happens to Voss, I want it to happen legally. I want it to stick. I want him in a courtroom where he has to look at every person he extorted and hear what he did to them in their own words. I don't want him to disappear quietly because someone leaned on him. That doesn't fix the system. That just removes one person from it. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Your mother taught you well, he said. You taught me too, Emma said. You just taught me different things. He nodded slowly. Then all right, tell me exactly what you need. She told him. She laid out everything, Officer Reyes in her notebook, the 32 businesses, Gerald Fitch's phone call, the contacts inside the department that Reyes had hinted at. Without confirming the records, she believed people had been keeping the specific fear mechanism that had kept everyone quiet. She talked for 12 minutes straight, and her father listened the way he had always listened, completely without interrupting, without the slight impatience that most people showed when they thought they already understood what you were telling them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The officer, he said. Reyes, you trust her. Yes. Enough to have her here this morning when things start moving. Emma thought about that, about Reyes sitting off duty at the counter with her careful eyes on the legal pad. About what she'd said, be careful that what comes to help you doesn't create a different problem. I think she'd want to be here, Emma said. I think part of why she came by yesterday was because she's been trying to find a way to move this case and running into walls. Call her, Daniel said, right now before this town wakes up and sees what's outside and starts making its own decisions about what it means. Emma pulled out her phone. Reyes picked up on the third ring voice alert in the way of someone who hadn't been deeply asleep. Emma, I need you to come to the cafe, Emma said, now in uniform. A brief pause. What happened? Nothing bad, something that's either very good or very complicated, and I need you here to make sure it stays in the first category. Another pause. I'm 15 minutes away. Emma hung up. Outside, the light was beginning to change the specific gray into gold of an Oregon mountain dawn, the kind that happened slowly and then all at once. The men her father had brought where she could see through the window, conducting themselves with a discipline that was impressive and also clearly deliberate. No one was being loud. No one was on the sidewalk in front of anyone else's property. They had arranged themselves along the road in a way that was visible but not aggressive, present but not threatening, to the way that a very large animal holds itself when it wants you to know it's there without wanting to make you run. At 6 in the morning, the town of Millhaven began to wake up. The first person Emma saw register what was outside was Marcus, who ran the diner 2 blocks down and arrived every morning at 5:45 to start prep. He came out his back door and stopped completely still on the sidewalk and stared for about 10 seconds and then took out his phone. She didn't know who he called. She hoped it was someone useful. By 6:20, lights were coming on in windows up and down the street. By 6:30, people were outside. Not a crowd yet, more like the careful early steps of people who had heard something that didn't make sense and needed to see it with their own eyes before they could process it. Reyes arrived at 6:42 in uniform and parked her cruiser in front of the cafe. She got out and stood beside her car and looked at the length of the road with the expression of someone recalibrating everything they'd assumed about how this week was going to go. She came inside. She looked at Daniel Walker standing at Emma's counter drinking coffee. She looked at Emma. This is my father, Emma said. Daniel Walker. Daniel extended his hand. Officer. Reyes shook it with the slightly careful energy of someone making rapid assessments. Mr. Walker, I understand you've been trying to build a case against Richard Voss, Daniel said, and that the primary obstacle has been getting witnesses to come forward. That's an accurate summary, Reyes said. Then we want the same thing, he said, because my daughter doesn't want Voss handled the way I would ordinarily handle someone who did what he did to her place. She wants a case. She wants a courtroom. She wants every person he's been bleeding for years to get to look him in the face under oath. He paused. I'm here to make that possible, not to get in the way of it. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Emma. You planned this, she said. I hoped for it, Emma said. It's working out slightly better than I hoped. Reyes pulled out a chair at the nearest table and sat down. She put her elbows on the table and her face in her hands for about 3 seconds, a gesture so purely human and unguarded that Emma liked her about 20% more for it. Then she straightened up and looked at both of them. Okay, she said, here's what I need. What happened in the next 2 hours was not dramatic in the way that movies made things dramatic. It was not a single turning point or a confrontation or a speech that changed everything at once. It was quieter and more human than that, and for that reason, it was more powerful. It started with Mr. Peterson. He arrived at the cafe at 7 sharp the way he always did, and opened the door and stopped in the doorway when he saw Daniel Walker at the counter and Officer Reyes at the table with a notepad open. He looked at Emma. Come in, Mr. Peterson. She said the same way she said it every morning. He came in. He sat at his usual corner table. Emma brought him his coffee without being asked. He looked at the man at the counter, the big man with the weathered face and the leather jacket and the presence that filled a room without effort, and then he looked at Emma. Is this your father? He said. Yes, she said. Mr. Peterson looked at Daniel Walker for a long moment. Then he said to no one in particular, I have 3 years of payment receipts in a shoebox under my workbench. The room went very still. Emma set her hand on the old man's shoulder. I kept them, Mr. Peterson said more quietly, almost to himself. Every single one. I don't know why I kept them. I told myself I was foolish, that nothing would ever come of it, that I was just an old man with a shoebox. He paused. Can I bring them here? Yes, Officer Reyes said carefully. Mr. Peterson, I want to be honest with you. Anything you bring here, I will do everything in my power to protect. And your testimony, if you're willing to give it, would be significant. The old man picked up his coffee cup with hands that were not entirely steady. It's been 3 years, he said. 3 years of paying that man money I saved in a shop I built myself. I'm 81 years old. He set the cup down. I'm tired of being afraid. He left to get the shoebox. He came back 22 minutes later, and he was not alone. He had stopped on his way back at the hardware store, where Martin had gone very still at Emma's casual questions 2 days ago. Martin was with him. Martin was carrying a manila folder, and his face had the tight, deliberate expression of a man who had made a decision that frightened him, but had decided the fear was no longer the most important consideration. Emma looked at the two of them coming through the door and felt something she could not immediately name, something that was not quite relief and not quite vindication, but was in the space between them where gratitude lived. I've got records going back 4 years, Martin said. He set the manila folder on the counter. Bank transfers, text messages, 3 voicemails I saved because I thought. He stopped. I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe someday. Someday is today, Emma said. By 8:15, June arrived with Donna from the pharmacy, and Donna was carrying a laptop that she'd apparently been using to keep a digital record dates, amounts, names of the men who came to collect photographs she'd taken covertly with her phone of payment envelopes. By 8:40, Marcus from the diner came in. He'd been watching from his window since 6 in the morning, and he had made 7 phone calls in those 2 hours, and 3 of the people he'd called were right behind him. By 9 o'clock, Emma's cafe was full, not of customers, of people. People with shoeboxes and manila folders and phones with saved text messages and handwritten logs and notebooks and photographs and memories they had been carrying alone 4 years. People who had, over the course of 2 hours, watched through their windows as something arrived that was large enough and visible enough, and clearly not going away to make the math of fear finally stop making sense. Daniel Walker stood at the back wall of the cafe and did not say much. He didn't need to. His presence was the thing. The 112 men outside was the thing. The message it sent was not a threat, it was a counterweight. Voss's operation had always relied on the belief that there was nothing powerful enough standing on the other side to make resistance survivable. That belief had this morning been made visibly untrue. Officer Reyes was moving through the room with her notebook and a recorder she'd pulled from her cruiser. She was speaking to each person individually and quietly taking down what they'd brought, asking careful questions, building the shape of something that had been waiting years for enough weight behind it to stand up. Emma worked the counter. This was not an accident or an oversight. She made coffee, she pulled shots on the borrowed machine, she ran the drip, she moved through the familiar rhythm of her work because it was her place and because keeping it running was itself the point, the exact answer to what those men had tried to tell her when they walked in and broke her things. You're small. You're alone. You don't matter. She made coffee for 32 people who had stopped being alone. At 9:30, her phone rang. Gerald Fitch. She almost didn't answer. Then she decided she wanted to. Miss Walker. His voice was different today. The professional smoothness was still there, but underneath it was a new quality thinness, like a surface under pressure. Mr. Fitch, she said, I'm calling because Mr. Voss has become aware of a gathering at your establishment and is concerned. Good, Emma said. A pause. I beg your pardon. I said good. He should be concerned. Is there something specific you needed to communicate? Or is this call primarily to establish that your client knows what's happening? Another pause longer. Miss Walker, Mr. Voss is prepared to make a significant offer, full cessation of any arrangement, no further contact, a payment to cover the damages to your establishment. He wants to buy his way out, Emma said. He wants to resolve this amicably. There's a police officer in my cafe right now, Emma said, taking statements from people who have been paying your client for years. Some of them have records going back 4 years. Some of them have text messages, bank transfers, voicemails. What your client should be doing right now is calling a criminal defense attorney, not sending you to offer me money. She paused. Don't call me again. She hung up. Frank had arrived sometime in the last 20 minutes. She hadn't noticed exactly when and was sitting at his regular stool with his coffee and his phone, which he was looking at with the particular expression of a man reading something he'd written and deciding whether to send it. Emma refilled his cup. You've got something, she said. He looked up. I've been saving his texts since the beginning. Every single message his people sent me when they were setting things up. Every follow-up when I paid. I've got 18 months of it. He paused. I've got a daughter in 7th grade. I know. That's why I didn't come forward before. He set the phone down. And that's why I'm coming forward now, because I realized something this morning when I walked past all those men outside. He paused. My daughter is watching me. She's been watching me this whole time. And I've been showing her that when something is wrong, you pay it and stay quiet. He looked at Emma. I don't want to teach her that. Emma looked at him. She's going to be fine, she said. You're going to be fine. Frank nodded. He opened his text messages and walked over to where Officer Reyes was sitting. It was at that moment at 9:47 that the door opened and Garrett walked in. The room noticed him immediately. Conversations didn't stop, nothing so cinematic as that, but the quality of awareness in the room shifted, a kind of collective stillness at the edges, people tracking, without obviously turning to look. Garrett registered the room the way a man registers that he has walked into a situation he did not correctly anticipate. His expression stayed controlled, but his eyes moved too quickly, taking count, landing on the folders and the notebooks, and Reyes with her recorder and Daniel Walker at the back wall. He landed last on Emma. Emma met his eyes across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Everything he needed to know was visible in the room around him. Every piece of evidence, every face, every person who had this morning chosen something different than what fear had been telling them to choose for years. Garrett stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said at a volume only Emma and the people closest to the counter could hear, Voss is going to run. The room around them continued its low-level hum of conversation and movement. But Emma was completely still. What? She said. He's been watching this morning. We've all been watching. Garrett looked at the room again briefly. When Fitch called him after talking to you, something changed. He started talking about accounts, about timing. He paused. He's going to try to move money and disappear before this gets to a courtroom. Emma turned immediately. Reyes, she said loud enough to carry. Reyes looked up from across the room. He's going to run, Emma said. You need to make calls right now. Reyes was already on her feet, already reaching for her radio. She crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped in front of Garrett. Who are you? Someone who made a decision, Garrett said. Do you have information about Voss's location and finances? Garrett looked at Emma one more time. Something passed through his expression that was complicated and not easily named, the specific look of a person who has been living inside one set of choices for a long time and has just decided to live inside a different one and is not entirely sure what happens next. Yes, he said. Reyes pulled out her recorder. What came out of Garrett's mouth in the next 20 minutes was, as Emma would understand later when she had the distance to fully appreciate it, the piece that changed everything from a compelling collection of victim testimony into a case that would be very difficult to escape. because Garrett knew the infrastructure. He knew where the money went, which accounts, which shell companies. He knew the names of the two people inside the local department who had been providing advance notice of investigation activity. He knew the location of a storage unit in a town 40 minutes away, where Voss kept physical records he'd stupidly never destroyed. I knew all of it because he had been inside all of it. And somewhere between watching Emma Walker refuse to cry when they broke her mother's photograph and watching 112 motorcycles roll into a mountain town before dawn, he had decided that the thing Voss had always relied on, the certainty that no one would ever stand up, was no longer a certainty he could help maintain. Reyes was on her radio within minutes of Garrett finishing his initial account. She stepped outside and her voice was low but urgent, and Emma could see through the window that she was pacing, that the conversation on the other end had produced the kind of rapid back and forth that meant things were moving up a chain quickly. Daniel Walker moved from the back wall to stand beside Emma at the counter. "Is that man going to be all right?" Emma said quietly, nodding toward where Garrett had been directed to a chair in the corner by one of Reyes's colleagues who had arrived in a second cruiser about 8 minutes after Reyes went to the radio. "He made a choice," Daniel said. "It'll cost him something." "But he made it." Emma nodded. She looked around the cafe. At the 30-plus people who had come through her door this morning carrying years of fear and paper evidence. At the borrowed espresso machine she was running because hers was broken on the floor 3 days ago. At her mother's photograph on the shelf. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for coming." He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the photograph on the shelf too. "I would have come sooner," he said. "Any time you asked." "I know," she said. "You needed to not ask," he said. "For a while, I understood that. I still need people to know that this," she gestured at the cafe at the room at herself. "This is mine. I built it. Not because of your name or your reputation, because of 5 years of work. Anyone who's watched you this week already knows that," he said. "Nobody looks at what you've done here and sees me. They see you." Emma was quiet. Outside, 2 more police vehicles had arrived. She could see Reyes through the window, still on the radio now, standing with her sergeant. A man Emma recognized but didn't know well, who had the look of someone who had just been handed a case that was significantly larger than he'd woken up expecting to deal with. At 10:15, Reyes came back inside. She stood in the center of the cafe and waited until the room had settled into attention. "I want to thank everyone who came here today and shared what they have," she said. "What you've given us this morning represents a significant body of evidence. We have officers moving right now on several fronts." She paused. "I can't tell you more than that, but I want you to know what happened here today matters. It will have consequences." The room was quiet. Then Mr. Peterson from his corner table said, "Will he actually go to prison?" Reyes looked at him directly. "I can't promise you outcomes," she said, "but I can tell you that what you brought us today, your records, your testimony, makes a very strong case. And we have additional information from a cooperating source that strengthens it further." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. "Good," he said. He picked up his coffee. "That's good." The mood in the cafe shifted then, not into celebration, not quite, because there was still too much uncertainty for that, still too many moving parts, still the awareness that legal processes were long and complex and not yet complete. But the heaviness that had been in the room when the first people walked in, the weight of years of quiet endurance of fear, managed alone, that had changed. It was lighter. It was the specific lightness of people who had put something down that they'd been carrying for too long. Emma made more coffee. She moved through the room, refilling cups, stopping for brief conversations, her hand on someone's shoulder. Here, a word of thanks exchanged there. She was not performing any of this. She was just doing what she had always done in this place, taking care of the people who came through the door. Around 11, as people began to drift out in ones and twos, as the morning settled into something more like the shape of a normal day, Daniel Walker put on his jacket and picked up his helmet from the counter where he'd left it 4 hours earlier. "You should stay," Emma said. "I'll make real food, not just coffee." "I've got things to coordinate outside," he said. "We'll be in the area." He paused. "For as long as you need." "I don't want you camping in my town for weeks," she said. "That would create its own story." "A few days," he said, "until this is settled enough that the risk of them retaliating is off the table." Emma thought about this, about the balance she was always trying to maintain, what she needed against what she needed to be seen as needing. "Okay," she said. "A few days." He started toward the door, then he stopped. Emma, he said. She looked at him. I know you needed to do this yourself for 8 years. I respect that. I always have. He held the helmet under his arm. But I want you to know something. Coming here today, seeing what you've built, what you did when people came at you, who you went to bat for when you made that call, I have never been more proud of you than I am right now. And that is not something I say lightly. Emma pressed her lips together. Don't make me cry in my own cafe, she said. He almost smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. He walked out. Emma stood at the counter and watched him go through the window, watched him put on his helmet and swing onto his motorcycle, and watched several of the men outside fall in around him as he moved the natural gravity of someone whose presence organized the space around them. She looked at the room. Reyes had left. Garrett had been taken somewhere in a police vehicle. The people who had brought their evidence were gone or going. The cafe was emptying back toward normal, toward the shape of a Tuesday morning, toward the thing it always was. The borrowed espresso machine needed descaling. She should start on that. She went behind the counter, pulled out the descaling tablets, filled the water reservoir and began the process she'd done 100 times before, routine, and careful, her hands knowing exactly what to do without being told. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. It read, Voss tried to leave. He didn't get far. More soon. Emma stared at the message. She set the phone face down on the counter. She kept descaling the machine. Outside, the sound of motorcycles was everywhere, steady and present, the particular sound of people who had come a long way and were in no hurry to leave until the thing they came for was done. The text from Reyes sat face down on the counter for 11 minutes before Emma picked it up again. She read it a second time. Voss tried to leave. He didn't get far. She set it down again and finished the descaling cycle on the borrowed machine. Rinsed the reservoir, ran 2 blank shots to clear the lines. Her hands moved through the familiar steps without needing her attention, which was good because her attention was somewhere else entirely, working through the implications of those 7 words and what they meant for the 32 businesses and the shoebox full of receipts under Mr. Peterson's workbench and Frank's 18 months of text messages and Donna's laptop and everything else that had walked through her door this morning. I didn't get far, which meant he'd tried, which meant Garrett had been right the moment Fitch called back after Emma refused the offer. Something in Voss's calculation had shifted toward exit. 4 years of careful, invisible operation, and the thing that broke his nerve wasn't a police investigation or a legal threat. It was the sight of 112 motorcycles in a mountain town before sunrise, and a cafe full of people who had finally decided that being afraid was no longer worth the cost. She wiped down the counter. At 11:45, Reyes came back in, out of uniform this time, in the gray jacket again, and she looked like someone who had been awake for a long time and was running on something beyond caffeine, but not quite ready to stop. She sat at the counter and Emma poured her coffee without asking. Tell me, Emma said. Reyes wrapped both hands around the cup. He got about 60 miles south before a state patrol unit pulled him over on the interstate. There were 2 bags in the trunk, cash hard drives, a passport, and a name that wasn't his. Emma was very still. He had a fake passport. Prepared, probably for a while. Reyes looked at her coffee. Which tells us this wasn't just a reaction to this morning. He had an exit built. He's been operating with the understanding that someday it might collapse. Except he kept going, Emma said. He kept expanding, taking on new businesses in new towns. Greed, Reyes said simply. Men like Voss, they build escape routes and then never use them because every year that passes without consequence makes them feel more untouchable. The exit hatch is psychological insurance. It makes them bolder, not more careful. Emma thought about the 4 years of payments in Mr. Peterson's shoebox, about the steady, normalized rhythm of extortion, monthly visits, collected fees, just another cost of doing business in Millhaven. How something monstrous becomes ordinary when it's sustained long enough. How the mind adapts to injustice when the injustice is consistent. What happens now, Emma said. He's in custody. State charges to start flight, fraudulent identification. The cash itself is enough to trigger financial crime investigation. But the real case, Reyes paused. The real case is what all of you built this morning. The testimony, the records, the paper trail. That's the foundation of the extortion charges. And with Garrett cooperating, we have the infrastructure where the money moved, how it was laundered, who helped him inside the department. Emma looked at her. The 2 people inside the department. They've been suspended pending investigation. Reyes said it flatly without editorializing the way someone says a thing they've accepted the weight of. One of them is someone I've worked beside for 2 years. The room was quiet. I'm sorry, Emma said. Don't be. Reyes stopped, looked at the counter. It explains a lot of things I should have questioned earlier. That's on me. It's on him, Emma said. Whatever he chose, that's on him. Reyes looked up at her. Something in her expression shifted, a small release of something she'd been holding tightly. Yeah, she said. It is. She finished her coffee and set the cup down. The DA's office is going to want statements from everyone who came in this morning. Formal ones recorded in the next few days. I've already been in contact with an advocate's office that works with extortion victims. They'll have someone here tomorrow who can walk people through the process, make sure everyone knows their rights, what to expect. Emma nodded. There's one other thing, Reyes said. She reached into her jacket and set a folded piece of paper on the counter. That's Fitch's contact information. Gerald Fitch, the attorney. He called the department this morning about an hour after you last spoke to him. He wants to cooperate. Emma stared at the paper. Apparently, Reyes said with the faintest edge of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived nearby when his client tried to run across a state line with a fake passport. Mr. Fitch decided that the attorney-client relationship had reached its natural conclusion. Emma picked up the paper, set it back down. What does his cooperation give you? Communication records between him and Voss going back 3 years. Draft documents, contracts, fake agreements. The legal infrastructure Voss used to make the extortion look like legitimate business services. Reyes paused. And the names of 4 other individuals in 2 neighboring counties who were operating satellite versions of the same scheme under Voss's direction. The number landed like something physical. This is bigger than Millhaven, Emma said. It was always bigger than Millhaven, Reyes said. We just couldn't prove it from the inside of one small case with no witnesses. Emma sat with that for a moment. She thought about the morning she had opened the cafe with the borrowed machine and the hand-lettered sign, thinking she was fighting for her own square footage of the world. She thought about the phone call to her father and what she'd said to him. I need people to stop being afraid. That's all. I need something to change the math. She hadn't known how large the math actually was. She hadn't known that the 32 businesses she'd mapped on a legal pad were a fraction of something that extended across county lines and had roots deep enough to require a fake passport and a planned escape. Emma, Reyes stood up. What you did, what you chose to do, how you did it, you need to understand something. Cases like this fail because the people at the center of them are either too frightened to hold on or they get angry in ways that make the legal case harder. You didn't do either of those things. You held every person in this room to a standard that made this winnable. She paused. That's not common. Emma looked at her. I was angry, she said. I'm still angry. I know. You just knew what to do with it. After Reyes left, Emma stood behind the counter for a while in the quiet of the midday cafe. 2 customers came and went. She served them. She cleaned the steam wand. She restocked the cup shelf. At 1:15, her phone rang. Not Reyes this time, not her father. A number she recognized as Donna's from the pharmacy. Emma. Donna's voice was different from every version of it Emma had heard over 3 years of coffee orders and careful topic changes. There was something open in it that hadn't been there before. I wanted to call because I didn't get to say it this morning and all the everything. I wanted to say thank you. Emma leaned on the counter. You don't have to thank me, Donna. I do, though. A pause. I've been paying that man for 2 years. 2 years. And every month I would make the payment and tell myself it was temporary, that something would change and then nothing would change, and I would make the payment again. She stopped. I have a daughter. She just started working at the pharmacy with me part-time. She doesn't know any of this. She doesn't have to, Emma said. She asked me this morning why there were so many motorcycles on the street, Donna said. And I told her someone was standing up for the businesses in town and that sometimes when one person does that, other people can stand up too. She paused. She said that was cool. She literally said that was cool. Emma felt something loosen in her chest. She's right, she said. It is cool. Donna laughed, a surprised, genuine laugh, the kind that comes out when something hits you differently than you expected. I wanted you to know that it mattered, what you did. What you did mattered too, Emma said. The records you kept, the testimony, that's the case, Donna. That's not me. That's you. A brief silence. Then, is your cafe going to be okay? Like financially? All the equipment they broke. I'll figure it out, Emma said. Okay, Donna said. But if you need anything, I know where to find you. She hung up. At 2 o'clock, Marcus from the diner arrived without calling ahead. He knocked on the counter, even though the cafe was clearly open, and Emma was standing right there, which was so classically Marcus. She'd been serving him coffee for 3 years, and she'd learned that he was a man who knocked on open doors as a courtesy, who said please and thank you with a sincerity that some people grew out of and he'd never lost. He set a container on the counter. It was, she realized when she lifted the lid, a full tray of his short ribs, enough for 6 people. Marcus, she said, you haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days, he said. It was not a question. She opened her mouth and then closed it because he was not wrong. My family has had that diner for 22 years, he said. He put his hands flat on the counter the same way June had done, and he looked at Emma with a directness that was not confrontational, but was very serious. 22 years, and I have never once in that time told anyone what was happening. The first payment was $1,100. I told my wife it was a vendor fee. I've been lying to her for 4 years. Emma was quiet. She found out this morning, Marcus said. When everything happened, when people started going to your cafe, my wife figured out what was going on. And she came to find me at the diner, and she asked me directly. He paused. She wasn't angry. She was sad. She said she wished I had told her because she would have wanted to stand up sooner and I didn't let her. The weight in his voice was specific and complicated. Not simple guilt, but the heavier thing, the recognition that protecting people sometimes means deciding for them what they can handle and getting it wrong. You didn't want to scare her, Emma said. I thought I was protecting her, he said. But he stopped. I was just carrying it alone, and it made me smaller. 4 years of carrying it made me smaller, and I didn't see that until today. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Does she know you came here, she said. She's the one who made the short ribs, Marcus said. She said to tell you it's an apology for her husband taking so long. Emma had to look at the counter for a second. She pressed her lips together, took a breath, looked back up. Tell her the short ribs are accepted, she said, and tell her she raised a good man. He just needed the right morning. Marcus nodded. He left without ordering anything. Emma looked at the tray of short ribs. She got a fork from the drawer and ate, standing at the counter because she was alone in the cafe and there was no one to see. And Marcus and his wife were right. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. At 3:30, Daniel came in. He came in alone without the bulk of the group around him, and he moved through the door the way he moved when he wasn't being anyone's leader. Quieter, a little slower. The particular ease of a man who has been performing a role all morning and has set it down for an hour. He sat at the counter and Emma poured him coffee and pushed the short ribs in his direction. He looked at them. Where did these come from? Apology short ribs, she said, from the diner. He ate without asking for clarification. After a few minutes, he said, I want to ask you something. Okay. And I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you think you should answer it. She looked at him. Ask. How are you? He said it simply and directly, the way he'd always asked the things that mattered to him, without preface or softening, just the question itself, laid flat on the table between them. Emma thought about the real answer. Not the functional one. She was fine, she was managing, she was doing what needed doing. The real one. I'm tired, she said. I'm angry in a way that I've been controlling so tightly for 4 days that I'm not sure what's going to happen when I stop controlling it. I'm glad today happened. I'm also, she stopped. What, he said. I'm sad, she said, that it had to be this, that it had to break this much before enough people could act. That Mr. Peterson sat alone within that shoebox for 3 years. That Marcus lied to his wife. That Frank has been teaching his daughter to be quiet about injustice, when what he actually wanted to teach her was the opposite. She paused. I'm sad that the world makes ordinary people carry things they should never have to carry alone. Daniel set down his fork. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her mother's photograph that morning, with the particular quality of a man who was holding something larger than his expression could fully contain. That's why you built this place, he said. What? This cafe. The reason it works, the reason people come here and stay and trust you. He gestured at the room. You see them. You see the weight they're carrying and you don't make them explain it or justify it. You just make them somewhere to put it down for a minute. Emma was quiet. That's not nothing, he said. That's actually a very specific thing. Not everybody can do it. She looked at the counter. Mom could do it. Your mother could, he agreed. You got it from her. Emma picked up her coffee. They sat together in the afternoon quiet of the cafe, her father and she, with the borrowed espresso machine and the repaired display case and the photographs on the wall, and her mother's face on the shelf behind the counter. And for a few minutes, it was just two people who had been in each other's lives in complicated ways for a long time, sitting and drinking coffee, which was in its own right one of the oldest forms of peace that existed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Raya's press are here, 2 outlets, possibly more by tonight. Do you want to make a statement or stay quiet? Emma read it, passed the phone to her father. He read it and handed it back without comment. It was her choice. He wasn't going to tell her what to do. She thought about it, about what a statement would mean, her face, her name, her story in the news, about the cafe's name in headlines, about the particular way that visibility worked. It protected you and exposed you at the same time. It made you real to people you'd never met, and it also made you a target for the ones who didn't like what you represented. She thought about Donna's daughter saying that's cool. She thought about Frank and his daughter in 7th grade. She thought about Mr. Peterson with his shoebox and his 81 years, and I'm tired of being afraid. She thought about 32 businesses in 4 counties and a fake passport, and a man who had counted on silence for so long that when the silence broke, he ran. She typed back, I'll make a statement. Nothing about my father or anyone connected to him, just about the community. Reyes responded in 30 seconds, understood. Come out when you're ready. I'll be with you. Emma set the phone down and looked at her father. I'm going to talk to the press, she said. He nodded. I'm not going to mention you or anyone with you. I know, he said. He didn't sound disappointed. He sounded like he'd expected exactly that. I'm going to say this was the community, she said, because it was. It was, he agreed. Emma untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter. She smoothed her hair back. She looked at her reflection briefly in the dark surface of the machine. Then she walked out the front door of Golden Pine Cafe. There were 2 reporters outside, one with a camera operator, one with just a phone. There were also, she registered this with a particular fullness in her chest, about 20 of the people who had been in her cafe that morning. They had come back, or maybe they had never fully left. Martin from the hardware store was there, June, Frank, old Mr. Peterson, who had clearly walked over from his woodworking shop and was standing at the back with his coffee cup still in his hand like he'd forgotten to put it down. Emma looked at all of them, then she looked at the cameras. My name is Emma Walker, she said. I own the Golden Pine Cafe. 4 days ago, men working for Richard Voss destroyed my equipment and my property because I refused to pay an extortion fee. What I didn't know then was how many other business owners in this community had been living with that same pressure for years. She paused. Today, those people brought what they had. Their records, their testimony, their memories of every dollar they paid and every threat they received. They did it because they finally had a reason to believe that coming forward was survivable, that they weren't alone. She looked at the people gathered outside her cafe. That's the story, not me, them. One of the reporters, a woman in her 30s with a recorder, stepped forward. Miss Walker, can you tell us about the outside support that arrived this morning? There's been a significant visible presence in town. What arrived this morning was the reason people could act, Emma said carefully. Beyond that, I'm going to let the investigation speak for itself. Were you afraid? The second reporter asked. Emma thought about the 4 minutes of systematic destruction in her cafe. She thought about the voices outside her window at night. She thought about sitting at the center table at 2 in the morning with a cup of tea she didn't drink. Yeah, she said, and I opened the cafe anyway. The crowd outside was quiet for a moment. Then Mr. Peterson from the back, in a voice that was not especially loud but carried because the morning was still and everyone was listening, said, That's what she does every day. She opens the cafe anyway. Emma looked at him. He raised his coffee cup slightly, like a toast. And then something happened that Emma had not planned and could not have manufactured. The people standing outside, Martin and June and Frank and Donna, who had arrived at some point without Emma noticing, and the diner employees who Marcus had apparently sent over, and the couple who ran the flower shop on the next block, and 4 or 5 others, Emma couldn't immediately identify they started talking. Not to the cameras, to each other and to the reporters who moved toward them, and to anyone who was standing there to listen. They told their stories. In the open air on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop in a small Oregon mountain town, people who had been carrying things alone for years started setting them down in public one at a time. And the weight of it was enormous, and the relief of it was visible in their faces and their voices, in the particular way that truth is visible when it finally gets said out loud after being held in silence for too long. Emma stood in the doorway of the cafe and watched. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter and more complicated than triumph, the specific emotion of watching people do a hard thing and do it well, of understanding that you played some role in making it possible, while also knowing that the courage itself was entirely theirs. Her father appeared beside her. He'd come to stand in the doorway without her noticing. He was looking at the people on the sidewalk the same way she was. "This is what you called me for," he said. "Yes. You knew this was what would happen." "I hoped," she said. "I didn't know." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, when you were 7 years old, you organized the kids on our street to bring groceries to the woman in the corner house who never came outside. You just decided it should happen and made it happen." Emma looked at him. "I don't remember that." "I do," he said. "You were 7 and you knocked on every door on the block and you told every kid whose parents had extra food that Mrs. Calloway needed some. And they did it. Because you asked." He paused. "I've been watching you do that your whole life, in different ways, in different places." "You should have told me that before now," she said. "You weren't ready to hear it from me before now," he said. She couldn't argue with that. At 5 o'clock, as the press wrapped up and the crowd on the sidewalk thinned and the afternoon moved toward evening, Reyes found Emma inside and sat at the counter one more time. "The DA's office reached out," she said. "They want to move quickly. The extortion charges across 4 counties, combined with the flight, the fraudulent identification, the financial crimes, they're looking at a significant case. They asked me to tell you," she paused, chose words. "They asked me to tell you that your testimony as the initial complainant and the person who effectively organized the community response is going to be central. They want to meet with you this week." Emma nodded. "There's something else," Reyes said. She hesitated in a way that was uncharacteristic. "The 2 officers who've been suspended, one of them when he was brought in today, said something. He said he'd been watching your cafe for 2 years and always figured you'd break eventually. That everybody does." She paused. "He seemed genuinely confused about why you didn't." Emma looked at the counter. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him I asked myself the same question," Reyes said, "and that I thought the answer was that you weren't fighting to protect yourself. You were fighting to protect a place that belonged to other people too." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "That's not wrong," she said finally. Reyes stood up. She extended her hand. Emma shook it. "This isn't over," Reyes said. "The legal process is going to be long, and there will be difficult days in it. I know. But today was real. What happened in this room today was real, and it will hold." After Reyes left, Emma was alone in the cafe for the first time since 4 in the morning. She went through closing the way she always did. The register, the machines, the cleaning, the chairs, up on the tables, the lights. Every step in its order. She stopped at the wall of photographs. She'd put them all back, or as many of them as she could, in the days since the men had walked in and taken them down. Some had new glass, some had no glass at all. One had a crack running diagonally through the print that she hadn't been able to fix. A photograph of the cafe's first week opened, the counter still bare of the personal touches she'd added over the years, Emma behind it looking younger and more uncertain than she remembered feeling. She touched the cracked print. She thought about what she'd said to the reporters. What arrived this morning was the reason people could act. But it wasn't just what arrived, it was what had been there all along, in shoeboxes and manila folders and saved text messages and digital records on a laptop. Years of evidence that people had been carefully, quietly preserving, not because they knew they'd use it, but because some part of them refused to let the truth disappear completely. Some part of them had held on to the reality of what was being done to them, even when the rest of them had accepted the necessity of being quiet about it. That was its own form of courage. The kind that doesn't look like courage from the outside because it's invisible, because it lives in a shoebox under a workbench, because it's expressed as a folder in a filing cabinet rather than a stand in a street. Emma took down the cracked photograph. She carried it to the storage room and found the supply of frame hardware she kept for repairs, and put in a new backing, cleaned the print carefully and fitted new glass over it. The crack in the print was still there and couldn't be fixed, but it was protected now, properly set, held in place. She brought it back and hung it on the wall. She stepped back and looked at the arrangement of photographs, her mother's face on the shelf, the cafe's history on the wall, the evidence of 5 years of work in community, in early mornings, and hundreds of thousands of cups of coffee. Then she went upstairs to her apartment above the cafe, and she sat on her couch and she let herself be tired. Not collapsed, not broken, just tired in the plain and honest way that comes at the end of days that cost something real. She sat with it for a while, not trying to move past it or reframe it or find the lesson in it, just letting the tiredness be what it was. Her phone buzzed once. A text from her father. We're set up outside town. Call if anything changes tonight. Good work today. She typed back, thank you for coming. His reply was immediate, and it was only 3 words, and it was the most her father had ever said to her. In 3 words, you called. Obviously, Emma set the phone on the cushion beside her and closed her eyes. Outside, distant, but audible through the window. She'd left crack, the sound of motorcycles was still present in the air around Millhaven. Not intrusive, not aggressive, just there. The sound of people who had come a long way and were not yet ready to leave, who were keeping watch in the dark, the way people keep watch when something matters enough to stay for. She fell asleep to that sound. She did not hear when it finally went quiet much later, somewhere in the deep end of the night. But when she woke up before sunrise, as she always did, and went downstairs and started the machines and unlocked the front door, the hand-lettered signs still in the window. The borrowed machine still running, slower than she was used to, her mother's photograph on the shelf behind the counter. The town outside was still there, still standing, and so was she. Frank came in at 6:48. He always came in at 6:48, and the fact that he did it the morning after everything, after the motorcycles and the statements and the press and the DA's office reaching out, in Voss in custody, 60 miles south with a fake passport and 2 bags in his trunk, was its own form of statement. Frank sat at his regular stool and put his elbows on the counter and looked at Emma with the expression of a man who had not slept particularly well but had made peace with the reasons why. Black coffee, he said. I know, Emma said, imported. He wrapped his hands around the cup. My daughter called me last night, he said. She saw something online, one of the news pieces. He paused. She said, Dad, is that the cafe you go to every morning? And I said, yes. And she said, is that the lady who wouldn't pay them? And I said, yes. He stopped. He looked at the coffee. She said she was proud of me for going to give my statement. Emma kept her hands moving, kept working, because if she stopped moving right now, she was going to have a harder time staying composed than she wanted to. She's going to be a good person, Emma said. She already is, Frank said. I just needed to make sure she keeps seeing me try to be one too. The morning built itself the way mornings did, customer by customer, cup by cup, the borrowed machine running its slow and slightly labored rhythm, while Emma moved through the familiar choreography of her work. But something was different about the quality of it. People came in and they stayed longer than usual. They talked to each other more. Martin from the hardware store came in and sat 2 stools down from Frank, and they started a conversation about the town council meeting scheduled for next month, and whether the agenda needed to include something about business protection protocols going forward, and they talked about it for 40 minutes with the focused, energized quality of people who have recently rediscovered that they have agency over their circumstances. Emma listened while she worked. She didn't insert herself. She just kept the coffee coming and let the conversation happen around her the way it always should have been happening, openly in her cafe, without the low-grade fear that had been living underneath everything for years. At 8:30, an attorney called. Not Fitch, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who introduced herself as working with the DA's office and asked if Emma was available to come in the following morning for a preliminary meeting. Emma said yes and wrote down the time and address on the notepad she kept by the register. At 9, June arrived with a folder. She sat at the counter and pushed the folder toward Emma without preamble. Emma opened it. Inside were printed pages, what appeared to be a petition already signed by 47 names. What is this? Emma said. It's a request to the county commissioner, June said, asking for a formal review of the business protection policies in Millhaven and the 3 surrounding towns with specific recommendations for a reporting structure that doesn't go through the channels that Voss was using. She paused. Donna drafted the language last night. I did the formatting. Marcus got 20 signatures from the diner alone. Emma looked at the list of names. She recognized nearly all of them. She recognized the handwriting variations. The different pens used the slightly different pressures of different hands. You did this last night, Emma said. We had a group text going, June said. It started when Donna sent the draft to me and Marcus around 8, and by midnight we had 47 signatures. Emma looked up at her. June. Don't, June said with the particular tone of someone who is preemptively heading off an emotional response. They're not ready to handle either. Just look at the last name on the list. Emma turned to the last page. The last signature was in a handwriting that she recognized immediately, careful. Slightly old-fashioned cursive, the hand of a man who had learned to write in an era when penmanship was taught as a serious discipline. Harold Peterson. And beneath his name, in the same careful cursive, he'd written a note that was not part of the form, in memory of my wife Dorothy, who always said this town was worth fighting for. She was right. Emma set the folder down on the counter. She pressed her palm flat against it and took a slow breath. Okay, she said, okay. She looked up at June. What do you need from me? Your signature, June said, Shemaiah, and maybe a date when you'd be willing to present this at the commissioner's office. Because we thought if you were willing to go, it would carry more weight with you there. There's an open session next Thursday. I'll be there, Emma said. June nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else and was choosing not to. Then she changed her mind. I've known you for 3 years, she said. I've been coming in twice a week for 3 years and I thought I knew who you were, the woman who made the lavender latte, the woman who remembered everyone's name. She paused. I didn't know any of it. Not really. You knew the part that matters, Emma said. The rest is just context. The rest, June said firmly, is also you, and it's remarkable. She left the folder on the counter and took her latte and went to her usual table and opened her book, and Emma looked at the petition with 47 signatures and one handwritten note from an 81-year-old man whose wife had always believed the town was worth fighting for. She signed her name at the top where it belonged. The first major twist came at 11:15 from a source Emma had not anticipated. Garrett called her. She had not expected to hear from him. She'd assumed he was somewhere in the custody of the legal process, being processed as a cooperating witness, speaking to lawyers, navigating the specific complicated territory of someone who has been inside a criminal operation and has chosen to step out of it. She picked up partly because she was curious and partly because, after everything she felt, she owed him that much. Miss Walker, he said. Garrett, she said. I wanted to call you before things got too far into the legal process and calling became complicated. His voice was different from every version of it she'd heard in her cafe. Not the controlled professional flatness he'd used when he was there on Voss's behalf. Something more unguarded, something that sounded tired. I wanted to say something that I don't think should wait. Emma waited. I knew what we were doing was wrong, he said, from the beginning. Every time I walked into a business and put that paper on the counter, I knew. I told myself the usual things, that it was just business, that someone else would do it. If I didn't, that the people paying could afford it. He paused. When we came back the second time to your cafe, when your guys broke the equipment, I watched you pick up that picture frame. Emma was very still. And I watched you not cry, he said. And I kept thinking about that all that day and all that night. The way you just picked it up and started taking the glass off. Like the most important thing in the world was to get the glass off your mother's face. His voice was rough in a way that was clearly not intentional. I have a mother. She passed 2 years ago, and I kept thinking if someone had broken something of hers, and if I had been the one standing there. He stopped. You don't have to explain it to me, Emma said quietly. I know. I'm not explaining it for me. I'm explaining it for you. He paused. I want you to know that what happened with your cafe, what I was part of, I'm sorry. That's an inadequate word for it, but it's the only one I have. Emma held the phone and was quiet for a moment. I know you're working with the DA's office, she said. Yes. Are you getting counsel? A brief surprised pause. Yes, my attorney's been. Good, Emma said. Make sure they're advocating for you appropriately. What you did in that cafe on Tuesday morning, what you told Reyes, that matters. Make sure the people negotiating on your behalf know that you understand it matters. Another pause longer. He seemed to be recalibrating something. You're advising me. I'm telling you that the choice you made was real and it should count for something, Emma said. I'm not saying it erases anything. I'm saying it's real. I was quiet for a moment. Then, why are you being decent to me? Emma thought about that question, about the full and honest answer to it, which was complicated and layered and had several components that she was still working out herself. Because being decent to people isn't something I do when they deserve it, she said finally. It's something I do because it's who I am, and I work too hard to build who I am to let Richard Voss or anyone connected to him change that. The line was quiet for several seconds. Okay, Garrett said, that was all, but the way he said it carried more weight than the word usually held. After she hung up, Emma stood behind the counter for a moment with the phone in her hand. She thought about what she'd said, it's who I am, and whether she believed it, and she found that she did. Not without complication, not without the awareness that being decent to someone didn't mean absolving them, but genuinely and without performance. She believed it the way she believed in opening the cafe every morning, regardless of what the previous day had cost. Some things you do because you decided a long time ago that they were non-negotiable, and then you just keep doing them. The week moved forward. The meeting with Sandra Okafor at the DA's office lasted 2 hours and covered territory that was broader and more detailed than Emma had anticipated. Okafor was precise and thorough and told Emma clearly that the case against Voss was strong, that the combination of victim testimony, Garrett's cooperation, Fitch's records, and the physical evidence found in the storage unit 40 minutes away had given them a foundation that would be difficult to dismantle. She told Emma that there were additional charges being considered beyond the extortion, racketeering money, laundering conspiracy, and that the investigation had expanded formally into all 4 counties. There's something I need to ask you, Okafor said near the end of the meeting, and you don't have to answer today. Ask, Emma said. There's going to be media attention on this case. Significant attention because of the scope, the number of victims, and she paused. And because of the circumstances of how the community came forward. The story of what happened that morning in your cafe is already generating interest beyond the local level. There are going to be people who want to tell it. Documentaries, long-form journalism, that kind of thing. Emma absorbed that. You're asking whether I want to participate in any of that. I'm asking whether you've thought about it, Okafor said carefully, because your story is yours to tell or not tell. But I want you to know that there are victims in this case in all 4 counties who don't have your particular, she searched for the right word, your particular visibility. And sometimes when one person is willing to be the face of a story, it creates space for others to be heard who otherwise wouldn't be. Emma thought about Donna's daughter saying that's cool. She thought about Mr. Peterson's note in his careful cursive. She thought about Frank and his daughter in 7th grade watching to see what kind of person her father chose to be. I'll think about it, she said. I'll give you an answer by end of week. She gave her answer the next morning, which was yes. The week after the DA meeting, Emma's espresso machine was replaced. Not by insurance, the claim was filed, but processing took time she didn't have, but by the people of Millhaven. Martin had started it. He'd put a jar on his hardware store counter with a handwritten label that said Golden Pine Rebuild Fund. He'd seeded it with $100 of his own money. By the end of the first day, the jar had overflowed, and he'd called Marcus, who did the same at the diner. Donna set up an online version because she said correctly that not everyone carried cash. Emma found out about it when June told her somewhat sheepishly that it had been going on for 4 days without anyone telling her, because they were afraid she would try to stop it. They were not wrong. Her first instinct was exactly that. You can't, June said firmly before Emma could form the sentence. These people are not doing this because they feel sorry for you. They're doing it because they understand that your cafe is not just your cafe. It's theirs too. It's been theirs for 5 years, and you never asked them for anything, and now they want to give you this one thing, so please let them. Emma looked at her. I'm not good at accepting things, she said. We know, June said. We all know. Do it anyway. The new espresso machine arrived on a Friday morning. A proper commercial unit better than the one they'd broken, because Emma had talked to her supplier and he'd connected her with a manufacturer's rep who had, upon hearing the full story, offered her a significant discount that Emma had argued about for 15 minutes before accepting. The delivery was made by 2 men from the supplier's warehouse, and by some coordination Emma did not fully understand in advance, Approximately 30 people from Millhaven showed up in her cafe at 8:30 to watch it be installed. There was no ceremony planned, no speeches. People just came. Mr. Peterson came with his coffee cup. Marcus came with a tray of pastries from the diner. Frank came with his daughter, a girl of about 12, with her father's eyes and a directness in her face that suggested she asked questions and expected real answers, who looked around the cafe with the specific intensity of someone cataloging something important. The supplier's men installed the machine and ran the initial setup, and Emma pulled the first shot from it, and the sound it made, the clean, full-pressured sound of a machine running at proper capacity, landed in the room like something that had been missing and was finally back. People clapped. Emma stood behind the counter with the shot glass in her hand and looked at the room full of people who had walked in because something mattered enough to show up for. And she understood, for a full and complete moment, exactly what she had been building for 5 years without knowing the whole of it. Not just a cafe, a place where people could be witnessed. She set the shot glass down. "Okay," she said. "Everybody gets a coffee. On me. Tell me your order." The noise that followed was what joy sounds like when it's genuine and slightly chaotic, and nobody is performing it for anybody else. Frank's daughter, her name was Lily. Emma learned Lily, who was 12 and in 7th grade, and watching everything came to the counter and stood on the rail to see over it and looked at the machine with the focused attention of someone who wanted to understand how it worked. "Can I watch you make one?" she said. "You can help me make one," Emma said. Lily looked at her father. Frank nodded. Emma spent 10 minutes showing Lily how to dose and tamp and pull a shot, explaining the pressure and the temperature and what you were looking for in the color of the extraction. And Lily asked 6 questions in 10 minutes, all of them specific and smart, and the shot she pulled under Emma's guidance was genuinely almost perfect. "You're good at this," Emma told her. "I like knowing how things work," Lily said. "That," Emma said, "is the most useful thing a person can be." Lily looked at her with the direct measuring gaze of a 12-year-old who is deciding whether an adult is being straight with her or performing. Then she seemed to decide that Emma was being straight. She nodded, satisfied. Frank was watching from 2 stools down, and he had the expression of a man who is watching something that is going to matter to him for a long time. The twist that changed the final shape of everything came 3 weeks later, and it came from Garrett. His attorney contacted Emma's attorney. She had acquired one, Sandra Okafor had insisted, and she was a practical woman named Kim Berger, who wore excellent shoes and was deeply unimpressed by anyone who tried to intimidate her clients. And the message was that Garrett had, in the course of his full cooperation with the investigation, disclosed something that had not been part of any previous conversation. Richard Voss had a partner, not a subordinate, not an employee, a genuine financial partner who had provided the initial capital to establish the operation 4 years ago, and who had been receiving a percentage of the take laundered through 3 layers of shell companies the entire time. The partner was a man named Douglas Wren. He ran a commercial real estate company in Portland. He had no criminal record, no obvious connection to extortion, and a LinkedIn profile in a charity golf tournament named after him, and a wife who sat on the board of a children's hospital. He had also, it turned out, been systematically profiting from the suffering of 32 businesses across 4 Oregon counties for 4 years. When Emma's attorney told her, Emma sat very still in the chair across from Kim Berger's desk for about 30 seconds. "He's untouchable," Emma said. "He was untouchable," Kim said. Past tense. Garrett has financial records, actual records, transfers, agreements, correspondence. He kept them because he understood from the beginning that men like Wren are the kind of people who sacrifice the bosses of the world when the situation demands it, and he wanted protection. Emma thought about Garrett saying, "I know what we were doing was wrong." From the beginning, she thought about the way he kept those records, the same instinct that had moved Mr. Peterson to keep his shoebox and Donna to keep her digital logs and Frank to save 18 months of texts. The deep human refusal to let the truth disappear completely, even when silence was the safer choice. "What happens now?" Emma said. "The DA's office is already working on it," Kim said. "This took the case from significant to major. We're talking federal attention at this point. Money laundering across state lines, RICO considerations." She paused. "Douglas Wren is going to have a very different year than he planned." Emma looked at her hands on the table. She thought about a rainy morning and 3 men who were not customers. She thought about the sound the espresso machine made when it hit the floor. She thought about picking glass off her mother's face in the wreckage of everything she'd built. She thought about a fake passport and 60 miles and he didn't get far. She thought about the whole long chain of it. One refusal, one phone call, one morning when 112 people showed up because someone asked and it was finally safe enough to answer. Good, she said. The trial when it came was not a single day or a single dramatic confrontation. It was weeks of proceedings, of testimony, of documents entered into evidence, of legal arguments and cross-examinations, in the slow, meticulous work of a system building the case that the people of Millhaven had spent a Tuesday morning helping to make possible, Emma testified. She sat in the witness chair and she told the truth in order, without embellishment and without minimizing the three men, the paper on the counter, the second visit, the 4 minutes. The sound the machine made the photograph her mother's face behind broken glass. She said it the way she'd always said the things that mattered to her, directly, without performance, letting the facts carry their own weight. The defense attorney tried to rattle her. He was professional and persistent and used the specific technique of circling back to the same question with different wording to look for inconsistencies. He found none because there were none. She had lived it. She didn't have to construct a story that held together. She just had to remember what happened. And what happened was clear in her mind, with the specific clarity of experiences that changed something in you. At one point, the defense attorney asked her with the particular emphasis of someone who thought the question would land as damaging. Miss Walker, isn't it true that you sought outside intervention from an organization with a long history of criminal activity in order to pressure the local business community into coming forward? Emma looked at him. I called my father, she said. When men destroyed my property and threatened my livelihood, I called my father, and my father came. Everything that happened after that was the decision of the people in this community to stop being afraid. She paused. Is that the outside intervention you're referring to? The courtroom was quiet. The defense attorney moved to his next question. Richard Voss was convicted on 11 counts. Racketeering, extortion across multiple counts, money laundering. It's a conspiracy. The sentence was substantial, and the judge, in making the sentencing statement, used the word systematic and the word sustained and the word community in a way that acknowledged what had actually happened, not just the crimes, but the years of endurance that had preceded the moment when endurance became action. Douglas Wren was indicted 6 weeks after Voss's conviction. His trial was longer and more complex and drew significantly more press attention because he was a different kind of person in a different kind of suit in a different kind of world than Voss. But the financial records existed. Garrett's testimony existed. The trail of money existed. And Kim Berger sat beside Emma in the courtroom on the day the verdict came in and said nothing when it was read because the verdict said everything that needed saying. Guilty, 11 months after 3 men walked into the Golden Pine Cafe before it was open and put a piece of paper on the counter. Both men who had built and run and profited from the operation that had terrorized 4 counties went to prison. The morning after Wren's verdict, Emma opened the cafe. She always opened the cafe. Frank came in at 6:48. He had a newspaper under his arm, an actual physical newspaper which almost nobody carried anymore. But Frank had bought it specifically this morning for this reason, and he set it on the counter face up without saying anything. The front page of the regional section had a photograph of the courthouse and a headline, and below the fold a smaller photograph that Emma recognized as the one the local reporter had taken outside the cafe on the morning everything changed. She was standing in the doorway of the Golden Pine in the photograph, not looking at the camera, looking at the crowd of people on the sidewalk. Her expression in the photograph was something she hadn't known her face was doing at the time. It was the expression of someone watching people do a hard thing and feeling fully and without ambivalence that it was exactly the right thing. She looked at the photograph for a moment, then she set the newspaper aside and poured Frank his coffee. Black, she said. Black, and he confirmed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the way people sit when they have been through something together and don't need to explain it. At 7, Mr. Peterson came in. He set his coffee cup on the counter and sat at his corner table, and Emma brought his coffee without being asked the way she always had. He looked at the newspaper Frank had left on the counter. Justice, he said. The word was simple and complete. Yes, Emma said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He folded his hands around the cup the way he always did. The morning filled up the way mornings did. June Marcus dropping off a thank you pastry tray that Emma accepted without arguing about. Donna with a new haircut and an energy that was lighter than anything Emma had seen on her in 3 years of coffee orders and careful subject changes. People Emma knew and people she didn't, because the cafe had been getting steadily busier in the months since everything happened, not because of the story, or not only because of it, but because word had spread the way. Word spreads in small communities when a place becomes the kind of place where something real happened and the people inside it held. Atinini 30, her father called. I saw the news, he said. Good morning, Dad. Good morning, I saw the news. I know, she said. She moved to the back room where it was quieter. Both of them. Both of them, he confirmed. There was satisfaction in his voice, not gloating, nothing like that. The quieter satisfaction of someone who watched a thing be done correctly and is glad it was done correctly. I wanted to call you sooner, he said, when the first verdict came in, but I thought you might need that one to yourself. I did, she said. This one I didn't mind sharing. How are you? She thought about the real answer again, the way she'd thought about it the afternoon he had asked her across a counter with short ribs between them. I'm good, she said, and it was true in the full and unqualified way that it hadn't been for months. I'm genuinely good. Yeah, he said, I can hear it. A brief pause. Emma, he said, I want to say something and then I'll let you get back to your morning. Say it. You never needed the name, he said. You never needed anything I have or anything I represent. What happened in that town happened because of who you are, not who I am. Emma leaned against the wall of the back room. You helped, she said. I showed up, he said. You built the thing that was worth showing up for. She was quiet for a moment. I'm coming to see you, she said. Next month, if that's okay. The pause on his end was brief, but she heard everything in it. 8 years of silence and one phone call and 112 men on a mountain road before sunrise. And all of it collapsing into the simple, ordinary fact of a daughter saying she was coming to visit. That's okay, he said. That's more than okay. She went back out to the counter. The cafe was full, not overflowing, not crowded in the way that made it hard to move or think, but full in the right way. Every table with someone at it, conversations happening, the machine running clean and strong, the sound and smell of the place being exactly what it had always been and had nearly been taken from her. Emma stood behind the counter and looked at the room. On the wall, the photographs her mother laughing at something off-screen the cafe's first week, the Winter Festival, the newer ones she'd added in the months since. On the shelf behind her, her mother's photograph in its repaired frame, the glass replaced the image clear. On the wall beside the photograph, she had added something new 3 weeks after the verdict. Not a plaque or certificate or anything that announced itself loudly. Just a single photograph printed at the pharmacy by Donna, who had done it without being asked, and framed it herself and brought it in one Tuesday morning with a lavender latte in her other hand. It was the photograph from the newspaper. Emma in the doorway of the cafe, not looking at the camera, looking at the people on the sidewalk, at Martin and June and Frank and Donna and Marcus and Mr. Peterson. With his coffee cup raised like a toast and a dozen others, all of them standing in the open air outside the Golden Pine, having just said out loud the things they had been carrying alone for too long. Nobody in the photograph was looking at Emma. They were all looking at each other. That was the part she loved most about it. That was the part that told the truth completely, not a story about a woman who stood up against a criminal operation, but a story about what happens when people stop standing alone. When one person's refusal to be small cracks the door open just wide enough for everyone else's courage to walk through. Shalem. Lily came in at 10, Frank's daughter, who had been coming in on Saturday mornings since the day Emma let her pull a shot on the new machine. She climbed onto the rail behind the counter with the ease of someone who had done it enough times to have her own rhythm about it, and looked at Emma with the direct measuring gaze that Emma had come to genuinely love. Can I make Mr. Peterson's coffee today? She said. I've been practicing the timing. Emma looked across the cafe at Mr. Peterson in his corner. Go ask him if that's okay, she said. Lily went to the corner table and said something Emma couldn't hear, and Mr. Peterson looked at her over his coffee cup with the careful consideration of an 81-year-old man being asked to trust a 12-year-old with his morning coffee, and then he nodded once and said something back that made Lily's face go bright and serious at the same time. She came back behind the counter and began measuring with the focus of someone who understood that small things done precisely were how everything important was built. Emma watched her work. She thought about her mother, who had known before Emma did that building your own life didn't mean standing alone. She thought about her father on a mountain road before sunrise and the specific love that shows up without being asked to explain itself. She thought about 32 businesses and one shoebox and a manila folder and a laptop full of records and 18 months of saved texts and the particular human instinct that refuses to let the truth disappear, even when silence is the safer choice. She thought about the 4 minutes that had broken her machines and cracked her display case and shattered the glass on her mother's face. She thought about everything that had come from those 4 minutes because those men had walked into the wrong cafe and threatened the wrong person and set in motion something they were never going to be able to stop. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they had never thought to look, was that the quiet blonde woman behind the counter had spent 5 years building something that was bigger than her and was made of more people than just herself. They had come to break a small coffee shop. They had woken up an entire community. And the daughter they had never known, they were threatening the woman whose name they had never thought to learn, the girl they had looked at and seen only a target. She was still here, behind the same counter in the same apron, making coffee for the same people she had always made it for, and for new ones who came because something about this place had become the kind of thing people sought out when they needed to remember that ordinary courage was real. Lily pulled Mr. Peterson's coffee and carried it across the cafe with the focused care of someone transporting something fragile and important. She set it in front of him. He picked it up and drank it and looked at her. Good, he said. One word. But from Harold Peterson delivered with that particular weight, it was everything. Lily came back behind the counter glowing. Emma put her hand briefly on the girl's shoulder and then went back to work because there were orders coming and the morning didn't stop for sentiment, and this was her place and these were her people and the cafe was open and she had work to do. The loan sharks thought they walked into an easy target on a rainy morning in a small Oregon town. They were wrong about everything. And the woman who proved it to them was still standing exactly where she had always stood, behind the counter of the Golden Pine Cafe, where the coffee was good and the company was real and the door was always open.